A question that changed everything. Have you ever stopped in the middle of a sentence and realized you don't know how to finish it, not because the grammar is hard, but because your heart suddenly feels tired? That was me, standing in a small apartment in the United States, holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold. Asking myself a question that sounded simple but felt dangerous. Can you really love someone's whole life, not just the parts that are easy? And right behind that question was another one, quieter but more painful. Why am I still so bad at English after trying for so long? If you are listening to this right now, maybe you know that feeling. The feeling of wanting to quit, not just English, but the version of yourself that once believed things would be easier. I didn't come to America dreaming about love stories or perfect English. I came here thinking logic would save me. New country, new language, new start. That was the plan. But plans sound very confident until they meet reality. The reality was that English doesn't wait for you to be ready. People talk fast. Weather changes without warning. And life keeps asking questions even when you don't have the vocabulary to answer. I remember my first winter. The cold wasn't just physical. It was emotional. The sky felt lower, the silence heavier. I could hear my own thoughts too clearly, and most of them were saying, "You're behind." When you're learning English, motivation is not a straight line. Science actually explains this well. Our brains love quick rewards. Dopamine rises when we feel progress. But language learning is slow, messy, and full of mistakes. No instant win. So the brain starts to resist. It creates excuses. You're too old. You don't have talent. You'll never sound natural. This isn't laziness. It's your nervous system trying to protect you from frustration. Knowing this helped me stop hating myself. I wasn't weak. My brain was just tired. Still, understanding the problem didn't magically fix it. Every night, I told myself I would practice listening. And every night, I found myself scrolling, avoiding English like it was an awkward ex. Then one evening, after a long day of work and small failures, I asked that question again, out loud this time. Can you love someone's whole life? I wasn't talking about romance yet. I was talking about commitment. About staying when things are not exciting. About choosing the slow path. That question became the doorway to everything that followed. Because learning English is a relationship. You don't just love it when it's fun. You love it when it's boring, uncomfortable, repetitive. You love it when it shows you your limits. Psychologists call this identity-based learning. When you stop treating English as a task and start treating it as part of who you are becoming, resistance drops. Not completely, but enough to keep going. So I made a small promise. Not a big one. Big promises scare the brain. I promised myself I would listen to English the way I listen to a friend telling a story. Slowly. Without pressure to understand every word. Just staying present. Research shows that comprehension improves when anxiety decreases. Your brain processes language better when it feels safe. That's why children learn so fast. They're not afraid of sounding stupid. That night, I played a simple story. Nothing fancy. Real voice. Real pauses. I didn't take notes. I didn't translate. I just listened. And something unexpected happened. I didn't feel smart. But I felt calm. And calm is underrated. Calm is where learning actually starts. I didn't know yet that this calm would lead me to a person. A single parent. A life that came with children, history, responsibility, and love that didn't fit into neat sentences. I didn't know that my English would grow not from textbooks, but from dinner conversations, school schedules, and quiet talks after the kids went to sleep. But every story starts with a question. And this one started here, with me, tired, imperfect, and still listening. If you're struggling right now, let me say this clearly, you're not failing at English. You're negotiating with your brain, your emotions, and your life. That's normal. Don't ask yourself, am I good enough? Ask a better question. Can I stay a little longer? Can I listen one more minute? Because sometimes, staying is how everything changes. Arriving in a different climate. The first thing America taught me was not a word, but a feeling. It hit my skin before it reached my brain. The air was drier, the sky wider, and the weather behaved like it had its own personality. One moment it was bright and friendly, the next it turned cold and distant without warning. I remember stepping outside one morning, dressed for sunshine, and coming back shivering, confused, and slightly offended. Back then, I didn't know the word unpredictable, but my body understood it perfectly. Climate sounds like a boring topic until you live inside it. In the U.S., weather is not just background noise. It decides how people talk, plan, and even connect. Strangers comment on it in elevators. Neighbors bond over snowstorms. Small talk often starts with the sky. This mattered for my English more than I expected. Because suddenly, I didn't need complex vocabulary to join a conversation. I only needed to notice what everyone else was already feeling. Cold today. Hot again. Crazy weather. Simple sentences. Real connection. At first, I felt stupid saying things that basic. My inner critic whispered, "You traveled across the world to say this?" But neuroscience has a different opinion. The brain builds confidence through successful micro-interactions. When you say something simple and it works, when someone nods, smiles, or answers back, your brain releases a small reward. Dopamine again. Not the flashy kind, but steady. The kind that tells your nervous system, you're safe here. Keep going. Different regions made this lesson clearer. On the West Coast, the climate felt relaxed. Sunshine made people slower, softer in their speech. Conversations stretched. In colder regions, words were quicker, sharper, like people were racing the wind. I didn't just hear English. I felt its rhythm change with the temperature. This is something textbooks never teach you. Language adapts to environment. When you listen slowly, you start to notice how mood, weather, and tone blend together. There were days when the climate made me want to quit everything. Gray skies can press on your thoughts. Studies show that lack of sunlight affects serotonin levels, which directly impacts motivation and memory. On those days, English felt heavier. Words slipped away faster. Instead of forcing myself to study harder, I tried something different. I adjusted my expectations. 10 minutes of listening instead of 30. One short story instead of a lesson. This wasn't discipline. It was strategy. I learned to match my English practice to the weather, not fight it. On bright days, I spoke more even if my sentences were broken. On cold nights, I listened quietly, letting the language wash over me without demanding performance. This flexibility kept me moving forward. Motivation didn't come from pushing. It came from adapting. Weather also changed how I saw myself. In my home country, seasons were familiar, predictable. In America, climate reminded me daily that I was not in control. And strangely, that helped. When you stop expecting perfect conditions, you stop waiting for the right time to learn. You learn inside life, not outside it. There was a small moment I still remember clearly. I was waiting at a bus stop, rain falling sideways, jacket too thin. An older woman next to me laughed and said, "This weather has issues." I laughed too, even though I had never heard that phrase before. I repeated it later that day. It became one of my favorites. Not because it was grammatically impressive, but because it carried emotion, humor, and shared experience. That's real English. Climate taught me something else about love, though I didn't realize it yet. Loving a place, or a person, means accepting that not every day will feel comfortable. Some days are cold. Some are overwhelming. But you don't leave just because the weather changes. You adjust your coat. You slow your pace. You stay. For learners like you, here is the practical lesson. Use your environment. Talk about what's happening around you. Describe the heat, the cold, the rain, the silence. Your brain learns faster when language is connected to physical sensation. This is called embodied cognition. When words attach to feelings, they stick longer. So don't chase fancy expressions. Chase real moments. By the time spring came, I realized something had shifted. My English wasn't fluent. But it was alive. It reacted to the world instead of hiding from it. And somewhere between changing seasons, I stopped asking when I would be ready. I was already inside the story. Culture shock in daily life. The shock didn't arrive as a single moment. It arrived in pieces, quietly, disguised as normal days. A grocery store aisle felt too wide. Cashiers smiled and asked questions they didn't seem to need answers to. Neighbors waved like they already knew me. None of this was dramatic, but all of it was exhausting. Culture shock isn't about big misunderstandings. It's about hundreds of small surprises that slowly drain your mental energy, especially when you're trying to think in another language. In the U.S., everyday interactions are filled with invisible rules. People apologize even when nothing is wrong. They say "How are you?" and keep walking. The first time someone asked me that, I stopped and answered honestly. I talked about my day, my stress, my confusion. The person looked panicked, like they had accidentally opened a door they didn't plan to walk through. That moment taught me more English than any lesson. Not the words, but the intention behind them. Language and culture are inseparable. Linguists call this pragmatics, the meaning behind what is said, not just the words themselves. When learners struggle, it's often not because they don't know enough vocabulary, but because they don't know which social script is playing. In America, efficiency and friendliness coexist in a strange balance. Conversations are warm but brief. Polite but fast. Understanding this reduced my anxiety. I stopped taking things personally. The culture wasn't cold. It was just moving at its own speed. Daily life became my classroom. Ordering coffee taught me about choices. Milk types, cup sizes, names written wrong on purpose. At first, I rehearsed every sentence in my head like a performance. My heart raced. Over time, repetition calmed my nervous system. Exposure therapy works for language too. The more your brain sees that nothing bad happens when you make a mistake, the less it panics. This is basic psychology, but powerful when you live it. American homes felt different as well. Shoes on indoors. Open kitchens. Families talking while doing separate things. Conversations overlapped. Silence wasn't heavy, it was comfortable. I listened more than I spoke, not because I was shy, but because listening gave me patterns. Sentence shapes. Emotional timing. Humor placement. This kind of learning is implicit. Your brain absorbs structure without conscious effort, the same way children do. There were also moments that hurt. Jokes I didn't understand. Cultural references that flew over my head. Laughter that arrived a second too late. Those moments triggered a familiar thought, I don't belong here. Neuroscience explains why this thought feels so strong. Social exclusion activates the same brain regions as physical pain. No wonder language learning can feel unbearable some days. It's not just study. It's survival. Instead of retreating, I tried a small experiment. When I didn't understand, I asked simple questions. What does that mean? Why is that funny? To my surprise, people enjoyed explaining. It made them feel seen. It made me feel included. Vulnerability turned into connection. My English improved not because I spoke more, but because I listened with curiosity instead of fear. Culture shock also changed how I viewed discipline. In my old mindset, learning meant pushing through discomfort. In America, I noticed people valued balance. Breaks were normal. Mental health was a conversation, not a secret. This shifted how I practiced English. I stopped punishing myself for bad days. I treated learning like daily life, some days productive, some days slow, all days valid. One small habit made a big difference. Every evening, I replayed one interaction in my head. Not to judge it, but to understand it. Why did that joke work? Why did that answer end the conversation? Reflection strengthens neural pathways. It turns experience into learning. 10 minutes of reflection often taught me more than an hour of forced study. Culture also softened my view of love, though I didn't name it yet. Love here wasn't always loud. It showed up in routines, shared schedules, respect for personal space. Watching families operate taught me that commitment is often quiet. It's showing up on time, remembering preferences, accepting differences without trying to fix them. For you, the listener, here's the practical takeaway. Use daily life as content. Listen to how people greet, thank, disagree, and joke. Don't memorize scripts. Observe patterns. Your brain is excellent at pattern recognition when you let it relax. This approach reduces cognitive load and increases retention. Science supports this. Humans learn best in context, not isolation. By the end of that first year, culture shock hadn't disappeared. But it had transformed. It became curiosity instead of fear. Energy instead of exhaustion. English stopped being a wall. It became a window. Through it, I could see people more clearly, and slowly, myself too. Learning English the hard way. Failure didn't arrive loudly. It settled in quietly, like dust on furniture you stop noticing. I was doing everything I thought I was supposed to do. Watching videos. Downloading apps. Repeating sentences in my head while washing dishes. And yet, when someone spoke to me unexpectedly, my mind went blank. Words scattered. Confidence vanished. This wasn't beginner frustration. This was the deeper kind, the kind that makes you question whether effort even matters. In psychology, this state has a name, learned helplessness. When the brain experiences repeated effort without clear reward, it starts conserving energy by lowering expectations. Motivation drops, not because you don't care, but because your brain thinks caring is inefficient. Understanding this changed my relationship with English. I stopped labeling myself as bad at languages. I started seeing a tired system that needed a new approach, not more pressure. The hard way of learning English wasn't about difficulty. It was about mismatch. I was practicing English like a student, but living life like a survivor. My brain was busy navigating culture, work, weather, loneliness. Adding aggressive study plans on top of that was like asking someone to sprint with a heavy backpack. Of course I wanted to quit. That urge wasn't weakness. It was self-protection. There was a moment that clarified everything. I was watching a simple English video, something meant for beginners. Halfway through, I realized I understood almost all of it. But instead of feeling proud, I felt bored. I closed the video and told myself it was a waste of time. Later that night, I couldn't follow a real conversation at dinner. That contrast hurt. And it revealed the problem. I wasn't training comprehension. I was chasing stimulation. The brain learns best when challenge is balanced, not too easy, not too hard. This is called the zone of proximal development. I had been jumping between extremes. Either content that was comfortable but disconnected from life, or real conversations that overwhelmed me. No bridge between them. So I built one. I started using stories. Simple ones. Real voices. Slow pacing. Stories work because they give the brain structure. Beginning, middle, end. Emotion anchors memory. Research shows that narrative-based learning increases retention and engagement because multiple brain regions activate at once. You're not just processing language. You're simulating experience. I listened the hard way. Without subtitles at first. Then with them. Then again without. Not to catch every word, but to catch the feeling. Was the speaker calm? Nervous? Playful? Emotional tone matters more than perfect understanding. Your brain uses tone as a shortcut. It fills in gaps. This reduces cognitive load and builds intuition. Speaking was harder. I avoided it longer than I'd like to admit. Speaking exposes you. It removes the safety net. When you speak, mistakes are public. The brain hates that. Social risk triggers the amygdala, the fear center. To work around this, I spoke in low-risk spaces. Alone. In the car. Whispering sentences while walking. It sounds silly, but it works. Muscle memory matters. Your mouth needs practice as much as your mind. Reading came last. Not textbooks. Messages. Notes. Signs. Short emails. Real English. I stopped translating everything. Translation feels productive, but it slows fluency. Instead, I guessed meaning from context. This trains the brain to tolerate ambiguity. And tolerance is crucial. Fluent speakers don't understand every word either. They just don't panic when they miss one. The hardest part was emotional. Watching others speak effortlessly while I struggled. Comparison kills learning. Studies show that self-judgment increases cortisol, which directly impairs memory formation. So I set a rule. No comparing timelines. My English journey was happening inside my life, not alongside someone else's highlight reel. Slow progress started to feel meaningful. Not exciting, but solid. I could follow longer conversations. I could express simple thoughts without rehearsing. Small wins accumulated quietly. This is how real learning often looks, unspectacular but durable. And somewhere in this slow rebuilding, something unexpected happened. English stopped being the enemy. It became a companion. Imperfect. Sometimes frustrating. But present. Reliable. Learning the hard way taught me patience. And patience, I would later realize, was exactly what love was going to ask of me too. If you're listening and feeling stuck, here's the guidance I wish I had earlier. Match your learning to your nervous system. When tired, listen. When calm, speak. When curious, read. Stop forcing balance. Build rhythm instead. The brain loves rhythm. It resists force. Learning English the hard way didn't make me special. It made me honest. Honest about limits. Honest about effort. And honest about one thing that matters more than talent, staying. Staying with the language. Staying with the process. Staying long enough for life to answer back. Meeting a single parent. The meeting didn't feel important at first. No dramatic music. No slow motion. Just an ordinary moment folded into an ordinary day. I was introduced to them through a mutual friend. In a living room filled with toys that didn't belong to me and responsibilities that clearly didn't either. They smiled politely, the kind of smile you learn when life has already tested you and you no longer expect easy stories. At that time, all I noticed was how carefully they chose their words in English, just like I did. Single parents carry time differently. Their attention is divided, their energy measured. Conversations pause suddenly because a child needs something. Schedules are not flexible, they are survival tools. I didn't understand this yet, but my brain sensed it. There was a quiet seriousness beneath their humor. And strangely, that made my English feel safer. There was no rush to impress. No space for small talk that went nowhere. Every sentence mattered. From a language learning perspective, this was new territory. Most of my previous English interactions were transactional. Work-related. Polite but shallow. With a single parent, conversations were grounded in real life. School times. Doctor appointments. Weather affecting pickup plans. Simple vocabulary, repeated daily, tied to emotion and responsibility. Neuroscience calls this meaningful repetition. When words repeat in emotionally relevant contexts, they move from short-term memory to long-term storage faster. I noticed something else too. They listened differently. Not impatient. Not performative. When I searched for words, they waited. That pause changed everything. Pauses reduce performance anxiety. Studies show that conversational patience lowers cognitive stress, allowing language learners to access vocabulary more effectively. In that space, my English didn't feel like a test. It felt like a tool. Meeting their child was another layer entirely. Children don't simplify language out of politeness. They simplify it because that's how they think. Short sentences. Clear emotions. Honest reactions. Talking to a child removed my fear of sounding basic. Basic became effective. And effectiveness builds confidence faster than complexity ever could. There were moments I felt out of place. Watching bedtime routines I wasn't part of. Hearing stories with a past I didn't share. Loving someone with an existing life challenges the ego. Psychologically, this activates comparison and insecurity. The mind asks, where do I fit? At the same time, my English was growing through exposure to these moments. Language and emotion were evolving together, whether I planned it or not. One evening stands out. We were sitting at the kitchen table, homework spread out, dinner half eaten. The child asked a simple question in English. I answered slowly, carefully. The single parent watched, not correcting me, not finishing my sentence. Just watching. That look wasn't about language. It was about trust. Trust that I was trying. Trust that effort mattered more than fluency. From a learning standpoint, this environment was powerful. Low judgment. High relevance. Repetition without boredom. My listening improved because I cared about the outcome. My speaking improved because silence wasn't punished. This aligns with motivation theory. Intrinsic motivation, learning driven by personal meaning, is far more sustainable than external pressure. Still, fear lingered. Loving a single parent means loving a system, not just a person. Children, routines, history, boundaries. The brain naturally resists complexity. It prefers clean narratives. But life rarely offers those. I noticed the same pattern in language learning. I wanted English to be neat. Instead, it was messy, emotional, alive. Accepting that parallel softened me. I started noticing how American culture treats single parents. Respect mixed with quiet judgment. Support systems alongside expectations of independence. This cultural observation enriched my English further. I learned phrases tied to responsibility, resilience, and care. Words that don't show up in beginner textbooks but appear constantly in real life. There was also humor. Dry, situational humor. Jokes about schedules. Coffee dependency. Exhaustion. Laughing together releases oxytocin, which strengthens social bonds and reduces stress. Reduced stress improves learning capacity. Again, science quietly supporting life. For you listening, here's the practical lesson. Surround your English with people and situations that don't rush you. If possible, learn language where something real is at stake, not perfection, but connection. Even watching stories about families, relationships, and daily responsibility can replicate part of this effect. The brain learns faster when it feels emotionally invested. Meeting a single parent didn't immediately turn into a love story. It turned into a mirror. It reflected my patience level, my fears, my willingness to grow slowly. English was no longer separate from life. It was woven into decisions, pauses, and shared responsibilities. That meeting marked a shift. Not a climax, but a direction change. From learning English to survive, to learning English to belong. And belonging, I was beginning to understand, is the language we all chase, no matter where we start. Love and language barriers. Love doesn't wait for fluency. It shows up when your sentences are unfinished and your timing is wrong. With a language barrier, every feeling has to squeeze through a narrow opening, and sometimes it gets stuck. I noticed this early on. I could explain what I did at work, but not why a certain look made me quiet. I knew how to describe the weather, but not the weight of hesitation in my chest. English gave me tools, but not always the right ones. This gap created tension. Not dramatic arguments, but small misunderstandings. A joke that landed flat. A message that sounded colder than intended. Silence that meant thinking, interpreted as distance. Linguists call this pragmatic failure, when intention and interpretation don't align. In relationships, these moments accumulate. Without awareness, they turn into stories we tell ourselves. They don't care. I'm not enough. The mind fills in blanks when language can't. Psychologically, the brain hates ambiguity in relationships. Uncertainty activates threat responses. Cortisol rises. Defensiveness follows. I saw this happening in myself. When I couldn't express something clearly, I withdrew. Withdrawal felt safer than being misunderstood. But safety comes at a cost. Connection fades quietly when people stop trying to be seen. The turning point wasn't a perfect conversation. It was a slow one. We sat after the child was asleep, dishes still on the table. I spoke in broken English, choosing simple words, pausing often. Instead of correcting me or finishing my thoughts, they listened. That listening changed the dynamic. According to communication research, perceived understanding matters more than actual wording. Feeling heard reduces emotional load, even if language is imperfect. From that night on, we changed how we talked. We slowed down intentionally. Short sentences. One idea at a time. We asked clarifying questions instead of assuming meaning. This mirrors best practices in language acquisition: reduce complexity, increase clarity, repeat naturally. Love became the context for practice. Not as a lesson, but as a shared effort. There was vulnerability in admitting limits. Saying, I don't know how to say this yet. That sentence alone carried honesty. Honesty builds trust faster than eloquence. And trust lowers fear. Lower fear opens cognitive space. This loop of trust, calm, learning, fed both the relationship and my English. I also learned to listen beyond words. Tone, pacing, pauses. In American English, emotion often hides behind casual phrasing. I'm fine can mean 10 different things. Paying attention to nonverbal cues improved my comprehension more than vocabulary lists ever did. Studies show that up to 65% of communication is nonverbal. Language learners who tune into this develop better pragmatic competence. Arguments happen too. Love doesn't erase them. But even conflict became educational. I learned phrases of repair. That's not what I meant. Let me try again. These phrases are powerful. They buy time. They signal care. In relationships and in language learning, repair matters more than avoidance. Cultural differences added another layer. In my background, emotions were often implied, not stated. In American culture, directness is valued, especially in relationships. This mismatch caused friction. Once I understood it, I adjusted. I practiced naming feelings, even if awkwardly. Emotional labeling has psychological benefits. It reduces emotional intensity and improves regulation. It also expands emotional vocabulary, which feeds language growth. Loving someone with a full life meant accepting that English wouldn't always keep up with emotion. And that was okay. Love filled in gaps. But I didn't stop improving. I used real moments as study material. After conversations, I noted phrases I wished I had known. I looked them up. I practiced them later. Context-driven learning again proved effective. For you listening, here's a practical method. Use your emotions as signals. When you feel misunderstood, pause and simplify. One thought. One sentence. Don't aim to impress. Aim to connect. The brain prioritizes meaningful communication over grammatical perfection. Fluency follows connection, not the other way around. Over time, barriers softened. Not because English became perfect, but because patience increased. Love grew not in spite of the language barrier, but through navigating it together. That shared effort created intimacy. It said, "I'm willing to meet you where you are." I began to see language learning differently. It wasn't about sounding native. It was about being honest with limited tools and expanding those tools through use. That mindset shift reduced pressure. Reduced pressure improved performance. Again, the loop held. Loving across a language barrier taught me something essential. You don't need the right words to care. But you do need the courage to keep speaking anyway. And that courage, practiced daily, slowly turns struggle into strength. Understanding American family life. American family life revealed itself not through big conversations, but through repetition. The same mornings. The same questions. The same tired jokes at the end of long days. I began to understand it not as an idea, but as a rhythm. Families here run on schedules, calendars, and quiet agreements that are rarely explained out loud. Observing this taught me English in a way no classroom ever could. Dinner time was the first lesson. People talked while eating, but not always to everyone. Conversations overlapped and paused without apology. No one waited for perfect silence. At first, this confused me. I struggled to know when it was my turn to speak. Then I realized something important. American family conversations value presence over performance. You don't have to say something brilliant. You just have to be there. From a psychological perspective, this environment is ideal for language growth. Low-stakes interaction reduces anxiety. Reduced anxiety improves working memory. When your brain isn't busy protecting you from embarrassment, it can actually process language. I started contributing small comments. Short reactions. Simple questions. And those were enough. I noticed how parents spoke to children. Direct, but warm. Clear expectations paired with explanation. This style reflected broader cultural values. Independence is encouraged early, but emotional support stays constant. Listening to these interactions expanded my functional vocabulary. Words about responsibility, choice, and consequence appeared naturally. I didn't memorize them. I lived them. American families also discuss emotions more openly than I expected. Children are asked how they feel. Adults name stress, tiredness, frustration. This emotional transparency was new to me. At first, it felt uncomfortable. Then it felt relieving. Naming emotions has measurable effects. Studies show that emotional labeling reduces amygdala activity and improves emotional regulation. In simple terms, saying how you feel helps you feel better. This openness influenced my English practice. I started naming my own feelings, even with limited vocabulary. I feel overwhelmed. I'm tired, not angry. These sentences were simple but powerful. They prevented misunderstandings. They built trust. And they expanded my emotional range in English. Holidays revealed another layer. They weren't always perfect or joyful. Sometimes they were stressful, loud, and messy. But showing up mattered more than mood. Family life here values participation over perfection. That lesson mirrored my language journey. I didn't need to sound fluent to belong. I needed to be consistent. Parenting conversations taught me about compromise. Schedules change. Plans adapt. This flexibility showed up in language too. People rephrased when someone didn't understand. They didn't treat repetition as failure. They treated it as care. That attitude lowered my fear of asking questions. I also learned about boundaries. American families respect personal space, even within closeness. Children have opinions. Adults negotiate. This was reflected in language. Phrases like "I need some time" or "let's talk later" were common. Learning these phrases helped me navigate not just language, but relationships. From a learning standpoint, immersion in family life created natural-spaced repetition. Similar words appeared daily in slightly different contexts. Spaced repetition is proven to improve long-term retention. But here, it happened organically. No flashcards. No reminders. Just life repeating itself. There were moments of loneliness too. Watching a system I wasn't fully part of yet. Feeling like a guest. Those moments triggered doubt. But instead of retreating, I listened. Listening is an underrated skill. It builds comprehension quietly. It prepares you for participation when you're ready. For you listening, here's a concrete strategy. Watch or listen to family-based stories or shows in simple English. Focus on how people talk, not what advanced words they use. Notice routines, emotions, and repeated phrases. This mirrors real-life learning and trains your ear for natural rhythm. Understanding American family life shifted my motivation. English was no longer a personal goal. It was a shared necessity. A bridge to daily connection. That changed everything. When language serves relationship, effort feels meaningful. Slowly, I stopped feeling like an observer. I became a participant. Not fluent. Not perfect. But present. And presence, in families and in language learning, is often what truly counts. Raising kids across cultures. Living with children in a culture that isn't your own forces your brain to wake up in new ways. There is no hiding behind complex sentences or polite silence. Kids demand clarity. They ask questions that don't wait for your grammar to be ready. They repeat themselves without embarrassment. And they listen with a kind of honesty adults often forget. This environment reshaped both my English and my understanding of life in America. Raising kids across cultures is not about teaching them who you are. It's about discovering who you become around them. I noticed quickly that children respond to tone before meaning. If my voice was calm, they relaxed. If I sounded unsure, they sensed it instantly. Linguistic research supports this. Prosody, intonation, rhythm, stress, plays a major role in comprehension, especially for young listeners. Practicing English with kids trained my ear and my voice at the same time. Daily routines became language labs. Morning reminders. Lunch questions. Bedtime negotiations. The same phrases appeared again and again, slightly altered. Did you brush your teeth? Almost done. 5 more minutes. This repetition wasn't boring. It was stabilizing. Spaced, meaningful repetition is one of the strongest predictors of language retention. Here, it happened naturally, wrapped in responsibility and care. Cultural differences surfaced constantly. In American parenting, encouragement is explicit. Praise is verbal. Good job. I'm proud of you. At first, saying these phrases felt exaggerated to me. But I noticed the effect. Children stood taller. Confidence grew. Over time, using these expressions rewired my emotional vocabulary. I learned how affirmation sounds in English, not as theory, but as habit. Discipline was another lesson. Calm explanation mattered more than authority. Choices were offered. Consequences explained. This required precise language. Clear cause and effect sentences. I practiced them daily without realizing it. My English became more structured because it needed to be. When language has a function, the brain prioritizes accuracy. There were moments of confusion too. Cultural references from school. Idioms from cartoons. Slang from friends. I didn't understand everything. Instead of panicking, I asked questions alongside the kids. Learning together removed shame. Psychologically, shared learning reduces performance pressure and increases resilience. We laughed at misunderstandings instead of hiding them. One powerful change happened in my listening skills. Children speak quickly, but predictably. Patterns repeat. This trained my brain to anticipate meaning instead of translating word by word. Anticipation is key to fluency. Skilled listeners don't wait for each word, they predict based on context. Kids unknowingly coached me into this skill. Emotionally, raising kids across cultures softened my patience. Children don't rush growth. They expect effort, not perfection. That mindset transferred to my English practice. I stopped measuring progress daily. I trusted accumulation. Research shows that long-term skill acquisition benefits from delayed evaluation. When you stop checking constantly, learning stabilizes. There were hard days. Tantrums. Exhaustion. Moments when English felt too small to hold big feelings. On those days, simplicity saved me. Short sentences. Clear boundaries. Calm repetition. Simplicity isn't weakness. It's mastery of essentials. For learners listening, here's a practical insight. If you don't have children around you, borrow the method. Use children's stories. Speak aloud as if explaining something simple. This strengthens foundational structures and builds confidence. Fluency grows upward from simple roots. Living across cultures also showed me how identity forms early. Kids absorb values through language. Fairness. Independence. Expression. Watching this process deepened my respect for language as more than communication. It's culture in motion. Over time, my English became less cautious. Not because I knew more words, but because fear decreased. Fear blocks access to existing knowledge. When fear fades, ability surfaces. Kids helped remove that fear without trying. Raising children across cultures didn't make me an expert parent or speaker. It made me adaptable. Adaptability is the real skill. In language, in love, in life. By the end of this phase, English no longer lived in my head alone. It lived in routines, jokes, rules, and care. It became part of a shared world. And once language becomes shared, it stops feeling heavy. It starts feeling human. Doubts, fear, and commitment. Doubt doesn't announce itself. It whispers. It waits for quiet moments and fills them with questions that sound reasonable. Late at night, after the house finally settled, those questions arrived. Can I really do this? Not just love, not just family, but the long road of responsibility in a language that still felt borrowed. Commitment looks romantic from a distance. Up close, it looks like repetition without applause. Fear followed quickly. Fear of misunderstanding something important. Fear of failing the children emotionally because my words arrived late or wrong. Psychologically, fear thrives when stakes increase. The brain perceives risk and shifts into protection mode. This reduces cognitive flexibility, which makes both language and relationships harder. I felt this clearly. On days when fear was high, my English shrank. Sentences shortened. Silence increased. Understanding this pattern helped me respond differently. Instead of asking why I was afraid, I asked what my brain was trying to protect. Usually, the answer was simple. Belonging. Safety. Being seen as reliable. These needs are universal. Language just happened to be the battlefield. Commitment in American family culture is quiet but firm. Showing up matters more than promises. Consistency builds trust faster than intensity. This observation eased some pressure. I didn't need perfect English to commit. I needed predictable presence. Being there on time. Following through. Listening carefully. These behaviors communicate commitment more clearly than words. Still, doubt returned whenever decisions became serious. Long-term plans. education choices, financial discussions. These conversations required vocabulary I didn't fully own yet. My instinct was avoidance. Avoidance reduces immediate anxiety but increases long-term stress. Cognitive behavioral research shows that facing fear gradually builds confidence. Avoiding it reinforces the belief that you can't handle it. So I broke fear into smaller parts. One conversation at a time. One topic per evening. I prepared phrases in advance, not scripts, but anchors. I need more time to think. Can you explain that again? These phrases gave me breathing room. Breathing room keeps the nervous system regulated. There were moments when commitment felt overwhelming. Loving someone's whole life includes their past, their worries, their children's future. The mind naturally resists carrying that much. Neuroscience explains this through cognitive load. When too many demands stack up, performance drops. The solution isn't effort. It's prioritization. I learned to focus on what I could control. Showing care. Being honest about limits. Continuing to learn. This reduced mental noise. Reduced noise improved clarity. Clarity improved both English and decision-making. Fear also changed my listening. I became hyper-alert, scanning for problems. This reduced comprehension. Anxiety narrows attention. Once I recognized this, I practiced grounding techniques before difficult conversations. Slow breathing. Relaxed posture. Simple preparation. These techniques are proven to reduce anxiety and improve cognitive function. Commitment required courage, not confidence. Confidence comes later. Courage comes first. This is true in language learning too. Speaking before feeling ready is an act of courage. Staying present when misunderstanding occurs is courage. The brain learns courage through repetition, not reasoning. I noticed that fear softened when shared. Admitting uncertainty created space for support. In American culture, vulnerability is increasingly valued. Naming fear didn't weaken commitment. It strengthened it. Research on relationship satisfaction shows that emotional transparency increases trust and stability. For you listening, here is a concrete practice. When doubt appears, don't argue with it. Narrow your focus. Ask what one small action would move you forward. One sentence. One question. One moment of listening. Progress at this scale is sustainable. There were setbacks. Miscommunications. Moments of withdrawal. But each repair mattered. Repair teaches resilience. In language, repair teaches flexibility. Both are skills built through experience, not perfection. Over time, commitment stopped feeling like a test. It felt like a choice renewed daily. English followed the same pattern. Not mastered once, but practiced continually. Doubt still visits. Fear still whispers. But they no longer decide. Commitment does. And commitment, I learned, grows strongest not when everything feels certain, but when you choose to stay despite uncertainty. Small habits that saved my English. Big changes rarely saved me. Small habits did. Quiet ones. Almost invisible from the outside. When my life became fuller with responsibility, love, and uncertainty, English could no longer survive on motivation alone. Motivation is loud but unreliable. Habits are boring, but they stay. I learned this the slow way, by watching my English fall apart whenever my routine disappeared. At one point, I noticed a pattern. On weeks when life felt stable, my English improved without effort. On chaotic weeks, it collapsed. This wasn't about intelligence or discipline. It was about cognitive load. The brain has limited resources. When stress rises, it allocates energy to survival, not learning. The solution wasn't more study time. It was lowering the cost of practice. So I made English smaller. Instead of promising myself an hour, I committed to 5 minutes. 5 minutes of listening while making coffee. 5 minutes of speaking alone while driving. 5 minutes of reading messages slowly before bed. Neuroscience supports this approach. Habits stick when they require minimal willpower. Once started, the brain often continues. But the magic is in starting. One habit changed everything: daily passive listening. Not studying. Not analyzing. Just letting English play in the background. Stories, conversations, real voices. Research on language acquisition shows that repeated exposure builds phonological familiarity even without conscious attention. Your brain tunes itself quietly. This reduced the shock of real conversations. Sounds felt familiar before meaning arrived. Another habit was shadowing, but gently. I repeated short phrases out loud, immediately after hearing them. Not perfectly. Not loudly. Just enough to engage my mouth. Speaking activates different neural pathways than listening. Even imperfect repetition strengthens pronunciation and rhythm. Doing this in private removed fear. Fear blocks motor learning. Privacy freed it. I also stopped correcting myself mid-sentence. This was hard. My instinct was to fix mistakes immediately. But constant self-correction disrupts fluency. Linguists note that fluency improves when speakers prioritize flow over accuracy. Accuracy can be refined later. Letting sentences finish, even imperfectly, trained my brain to trust itself. Reading became more strategic. I chose content slightly below my frustration level. Easy enough to enjoy, challenging enough to learn. This balance is crucial. Too hard triggers avoidance. Too easy triggers boredom. I highlighted phrases I liked, not words I didn't know. This shifted focus from deficiency to curiosity. One surprisingly powerful habit was journaling in simple English. Not essays. 2 or 3 sentences about the day. How I felt. What happened. This integrated emotion with language. Emotional relevance strengthens memory encoding. Writing without pressure built expressive confidence. Over time, sentences grew naturally. I also changed how I measured progress. No more daily evaluation. Weekly reflection instead. Daily checking creates anxiety. Anxiety impairs learning. Weekly reflection allowed patterns to emerge without pressure. Progress felt real because it was observed calmly. Habit stacking helped. I attached English to existing routines. Listening while cooking. Speaking while showering. Reading during meals. Behavioral science shows that attaching new habits to old ones increases consistency. English stopped being an extra task. It became part of life. There were days I skipped everything. Instead of guilt, I returned the next day with the smallest version of the habit. Consistency beats intensity. This mindset prevented burnout. Burnout is often not caused by effort, but by unrealistic expectations. For you listening, here's a simple framework. Choose one micro-habit for listening, one for speaking, one for reading. Make each so small it feels almost silly. Protect them on bad days. Expand them on good days. Let rhythm replace force. These habits didn't make my English impressive overnight. They made it reliable. Reliability builds confidence. Confidence encourages use. Use drives improvement. This loop sustained me through emotional and relational challenges. As love and responsibility deepened, English no longer competed with life. It supported it. I could communicate needs. I could participate. I could repair misunderstandings. Not perfectly, but consistently. Small habits saved my English because they respected reality. They worked with my brain, not against it. They accepted that progress is uneven, but direction matters more than speed. In the end, English didn't grow because I pushed harder. It grew because I showed up gently, every day, even when I didn't feel ready. Especially then. Choosing love and growth. Choosing love didn't feel like a single decision. It felt like a series of quiet confirmations made on ordinary days. There was no dramatic announcement, no moment where everything suddenly made sense. Instead, there were routines that stayed. Conversations that continued. Effort that repeated itself even when enthusiasm faded. Growth, I learned, looks a lot like consistency wearing plain clothes. At this stage, my English and my relationship were no longer separate projects. They influenced each other constantly. When communication improved, connection deepened. When connection felt secure, my English flowed more freely. This isn't coincidence. Emotional safety improves cognitive performance. When the brain feels accepted, it takes more risks. Risk-taking is essential for language growth. There were still moments of doubt. Commitment brings responsibility, and responsibility magnifies mistakes. I worried about misunderstanding important conversations. About missing emotional cues. But instead of pulling back, I leaned into preparation. Before difficult discussions, I clarified my main point. One idea. One intention. This reduced mental overload and improved clarity. Cognitive science confirms that reducing informational complexity improves communication outcomes. Choosing growth meant accepting that perfection wasn't the goal. Improvement was. I stopped asking if my English was good enough. I asked if it was improving. That shift reduced pressure. Reduced pressure increased usage. Increased usage accelerated learning. The loop repeated. Love also demanded adaptability. Family life evolves. Children grow. Needs change. This required ongoing language development. New vocabulary. New contexts. Learning became continuous, not episodic. This aligned with adult learning theory. Adults learn best when learning solves real problems. English was solving real problems daily. I became more proactive. I looked up phrases related to parenting, planning, and emotion. I practiced them before needing them. This anticipation reduced anxiety during actual conversations. Preparedness is a powerful anxiety buffer. It frees cognitive resources for listening and responding. Culturally, choosing love meant embracing American norms more fully. Direct communication. Clear expectations. Emotional expression. I practice stating needs clearly. I need help with this. I feel overwhelmed. These sentences were simple but transformative. They prevented resentment and built trust. They also expanded my emotional fluency in English. I noticed a change in how others responded to me. Not because my grammar improved dramatically, but because my presence did. Confidence isn't about correctness. It's about comfort. When you're comfortable speaking, listeners relax. Relaxed listeners listen better. Communication becomes collaborative instead of evaluative. Growth also required letting go of comparison. I stopped measuring my English against native speakers. That comparison was unfair and unhelpful. Instead, I measured it against my past self. This aligns with self-determination theory. Autonomy and competence improve motivation when progress is self-referenced. There were setbacks. Stressful weeks. Emotional fatigue. On those days, my English regressed. Instead of panic, I responded with patience. Regression is part of consolidation. The brain reorganizes information during rest and stress. Temporary decline doesn't erase progress. Choosing love meant choosing to stay during those regressions. To keep communicating, even imperfectly. To trust the process. That trust extended to language learning. I stopped chasing shortcuts. I invested in depth. For you listening, here's a practical reminder. Growth is not linear. Expect dips. Plan for them. When they arrive, reduce demands, not engagement. Stay connected to the language in small ways. Listening counts. Presence counts. Over time, I noticed that English had become part of my identity. Not something I used, but something I lived in. This identity shift matters. Identity-based habits are more durable. When you see yourself as someone who uses English, behavior follows naturally. Choosing love also meant choosing a future. Shared plans. Shared language. Shared responsibility. English was the medium, not the goal. That realization lifted a weight. Learning became lighter when it served something bigger than itself. In the end, choosing love and growth wasn't about bravery. It was about honesty. Honest effort. Honest limits. Honest commitment to becoming better, not perfect. And that honesty, practiced daily, made both the relationship and my English strong enough to last. A happy ending in America. The ending didn't arrive as fireworks. It arrived quietly, the way real endings often do, without asking for attention. One morning, while standing in the kitchen, listening to the familiar sounds of the house waking up, I realized something had changed. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. But completely. I was no longer translating my life into English. I was living it. There was coffee brewing. A child asking a question from another room. A response leaving my mouth without rehearsal. That moment mattered more than any test score. It meant English had moved from effort to instinct. From study to habit. From fear to familiarity. America has a way of normalizing complexity. Families here are rarely simple. Love is rarely neat. People carry histories, responsibilities, and unfinished stories. Falling in love with a single parent meant accepting that life wouldn't reset for me. It would continue, and I would join it. English followed the same rule. I didn't start over. I stepped in. The happy ending wasn't perfection. It was stability. Shared routines. Shared language. Shared understanding that mistakes didn't signal failure. They signaled participation. Psychologically, this matters. When mistakes are reframed as engagement, the brain stays open. Learning continues. I noticed how my listening had changed. I no longer strained to catch every word. I listened for meaning. For intention. This is a hallmark of advanced comprehension. Not knowing everything, but understanding enough. My speaking followed. Less hesitation. Fewer apologies. More presence. Family life settled into a rhythm. School schedules. Work deadlines. Quiet evenings. English was woven into all of it. It didn't interrupt life anymore. It supported it. This integration is what many learners miss. Language thrives when it stops being separate. The children didn't care about my accent. They cared about consistency. Showing up. Remembering details. Keeping promises. These behaviors communicated more than flawless grammar ever could. In return, my confidence grew naturally. Confidence built through acceptance lasts longer than confidence built through achievement. Looking back, the question that started everything still mattered. Can you love someone's whole life? The answer turned out to be simple, though not easy. Yes, if you're willing to grow with it. Love is not about matching someone's past. It's about committing to their future. Language learning follows the same logic. You don't master it once. You grow with it. There were still challenges. Cultural misunderstandings. Emotional fatigue. Occasional language gaps. But they no longer felt threatening. They felt manageable. This shift reflects cognitive adaptation. When the brain accumulates enough successful experiences, perceived difficulty decreases. Tasks feel lighter even if they're not objectively easier. For you listening, this matters. You don't need a dramatic breakthrough. You need accumulation. Small moments stacking quietly until one day you realize you're inside the life you were practicing for. English didn't give me love. Love gave my English a reason. That reason sustained effort when motivation faded. It anchored learning in something human. Research consistently shows that purpose-driven learning outperforms goal-driven learning. Purpose lasts. Goals expire. If you're learning English right now, feeling tired, behind, or unsure, remember this. Fluency is not the finish line. Belonging is. Language is the bridge, not the destination. Walk it slowly. Walk it honestly. The happy ending wasn't that I became fluent. It was that I became understood, and learned to understand in return. That exchange changed everything. So here we are. A story about climate, culture, love, family, fear, and growth. Told slowly. Lived patiently. If this story stayed with you, if it made English feel lighter or more possible, then it's already doing its job. If this story felt a little too real, that's not an accident. Because learning English isn't about sounding perfect, it's about finding your place in a world that moves fast and doesn't always wait for you. Somewhere out there, someone is learning English alone tonight. Wondering if they're too late, too busy, or too broken to keep going. If that's you, let this be your reminder. Progress doesn't need noise, it needs consistency. This channel isn't about shortcuts or fake confidence. It's about real English, real emotions, real life in America. Told slowly, clearly, and honestly, so you can listen, understand, and speak with confidence. If you want more real English story practice, more love stories, family stories, and life stories from the United States. Stories that help you train your listening, reading, and speaking naturally. Then this channel was made for you. Subscribe now so you don't miss the next story. Like the video if it helped you feel understood. Comment below, tell me where you're learning English from. I read everyone. The next story will go even deeper. Different city. Different life. Different challenge. But the same promise, slow, real English that stays with you. See you in the next video.